What if the deadliest thing a pilot faced wasn't enemy fire, but his own pursuit of perfection? In 1943, America's best dive bomber pilots were dying not over Guadalcanal or Iwo Jima, but in training. Their planes were flawless, their skills legendary. Yet at the last instant of a textbook dive, something went horribly wrong. The aircraft kept coming down. No radio calls, no mechanical failures, just a silent, total plunge. Discipline had become a liability, precision a trap. This is a story about how doctrine, biology, and a hidden flaw in how we fly turned the country's finest aviators into its most vulnerable. The planes were flawless. The pilots, veterans, aces with hands steady enough to thread a needle at 20,000 feet, were textbook perfect. Yet instead of coming back from training, they were flying straight into the earth. No mayday, no screaming engine, no broken control surfaces to blame, just a perfect dive that never ended and wreckage that made no sense. Word in the ready rooms turned to whispers. Discipline became dread. If both man and machine were beyond reproach, then what invisible rule was dragging them down? That question didn't just worry a few officers, it began to demand an answer. At Naval Air Station Jacksonville, Lieutenant Commander James Flatley is staring at a stack of accident reports that reads like a nightmare. Plane after plane, pilot after pilot, gone over Florida, more lives lost here in a few months than he watched disappear in the brutal slog of Guadalcanal. He flips names, dates, witness statements. There are no flares, no radio calls, no enemy tracers, just silent wreckage and the same impossible question: why are they crashing while training? The answer should be simple, but it isn't. And worse, these aren't rookies. These aren't rookies. They're the best of the best combat-hardened aces who've bled through Guadalcanal and come back with medals, nerve, and 1,000 hours behind the stick. They fly textbook dives, hands steady, sightlines perfect, release points surgical. These are pilots other squadrons study, and yet, time after time, those same flawless runs end the same way. A plane that should have pulled clean simply doesn't. That contradiction is what keeps Lieutenant Commander James Flatley awake at night. How can men trained down to muscle memory be failing at the one thing they do perfectly? The final moments are always the same: a perfect textbook dive that simply doesn't end. One heartbeat, they're lining up the target. The next, there's silence, no frantic radio call, no frantic correction, just a steady, fatal descent. Veterans vanish as if frozen, hands locked on the stick, the earth rushing up like an invisible trap. There are no distress calls, no mayday, no frantic radio chatter, just radio silence where a human voice should be. Post-crash investigators pick through mangled aluminum and find no smoking gun. Engines wound down, controls set as if the pilot finished the pattern, instruments unbroken. Maintenance logs show nothing wrong. Medical exams reveal no catastrophic failure. What they find, instead, is absence, an absence of struggle, an absence of warning, followed by a single, silent, terminal plunge into the earth. The same footage, the same blank radios, the same unanswered why, and the pattern isn't isolated. It's beginning to repeat across bases. It wasn't an isolated freak accident. It wasn't confined to one base or one flight. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, the pattern repeated: perfect dives, seasoned pilots, and then silence. Hangars whispered the same grim refrain. Coffins arrived in a steady trickle. Training fields that had forged aces now felt like hunting grounds. The crashes weren't anomalies. They were an epidemic, subtle and merciless, moving through carrier air groups and shore stations alike. Wherever Navy aviators prepared for war, Somewhere else, a pilot was falling out of the sky without warning. Something systemic was eating the fleet alive. On paper, the Navy's reports were calm, clinical, almost soothing, an official message that training was proceeding normally and losses were within expected bounds. But the reality on the flight lines was different. In the ready rooms, pilots lowered their voices and traded the same grim stories. Mechanics swapped tacit nods over logbooks, and jokes thinly veiled real fear. Families stayed in the dark. Commanders hesitated to admit a systemic failure. The silence of the formal record only amplified the quiet panic among the crews, and every hushed confession made the problem feel less like bad luck and more like a gathering storm, one that someone would soon have to name. Then, a hard, ugly truth begins to take shape, one that the quiet reports won't say out loud. The pilots who die most often aren't the reckless. They're the ones who follow the book to the letter, hold the dive to the last second, squeeze every inch of range for a perfect hit. Precision becomes a trap. Discipline becomes a death sentence. In squadron-ready rooms, the whisper grows into a conviction. The best-trained men, the ones most faithful to doctrine, are the ones flying straight into the earth. It's a paradox mastery turning into its own executioner, and it changes everything they thought they knew about survival. Their discipline, their commitment to perfection, is killing them. What looked like courage on a report card, strict adherence to doctrine, flawless dive profiles, absolute focus, has quietly become a trap. An invisible enemy, not enemy fighters but human physiology and unforgiving rules, waits at the bottom of every textbook turn. Pilots who refused to cheat a foot of altitude, pilots who trusted their instruments and training with religious devotion, are the ones who never get to pull out. The very virtues that made them aces, precision, self-control, heroic steadiness, have been turned into a fatal weakness. The breaking point came for the legendary USS Yorktown's Air Group 3. During a routine exercise, decorated Lieutenant Robert Chen nailed his dive, then simply didn't pull out. No radio call, no smoke, no malfunctions. One instant he was flying, the next, another name added to a mounting list, and the ready room fell into a cold, fatal hush. 5 days later, the calm breaks again. This time it's Lieutenant William Stamper Chen's own flight instructor, a veteran so steady crews called him Steady with a capital S, who doesn't come back. He executes the textbook dive. He lines up the target. He pulls, and the world simply goes black. No radio calls, no smoke, no mechanical screams, just a perfect run that never ends. For a squadron that trusted training above all else, the shock is brutal. The man who taught others how to survive has vanished in exactly the same way as his pupil. The pattern is starting to feel deliberate. 2 aces from the same squadron gone in less than a week. At first, it's hushed speculation in the ready room. Then it becomes a raw, angry roar. Commanders shut the squadron down overnight. Planes grounded, flight lines empty, pilots pulled from cockpits and forced to watch their machines sit silent. Rumors metastasize into fear. Men who prided themselves on calm, exacting discipline now stare at altimeters like strangers. Families call. The Navy moves to contain the panic, but containment won't hide the pattern for long. Word of the 2 deaths climbs the chain of command and reaches Admiral Mitcher. The reports land on Admiral Mark Mitcher's desk like a stack of small, identical tragedies, a flight log here, a coroner's note there, a squadron grounded in a panic. At first glance, they look like isolated errors. Then he starts to see the pattern. Veteran pilots, flawless technique, no distress calls, the same silent arc into Earth. Numbers line up, maps reveal clusters. The instinct to file and forget feels dangerous now. This isn't a series of bad days. It's a catastrophic failure in the system itself, doctrine, training, human physiology colliding. Mitcher allows himself one hard breath and realizes this cannot be swept under the rug. Admiral Mitcher didn't file another report. He ripped up the timetable. Bypassing the usual channels, he ordered an immediate, top-level inquiry and poured Navy resources into it: flight surgeons, aircraft designers, squadron leaders, and test pilots all summoned. Instrumented flights were demanded. Cameras, altimeters, hard data, blunt questions. He wanted answers fast, no more whispers. The mystery had to be solved now. The investigation turned up a cold, ugly truth. Between November 1942 and April 1943, 47 Navy dive bomber pilots had died from pullout failures. 47 men lost to training accidents, more than the fleet was losing in combat across the Pacific. The numbers landed like a punch. What had been uneasy whispers in the ready rooms became a full-blown alarm throughout the service. This was no string of freak mishaps. It was a pattern, a crisis. Suddenly, the problem stopped being a collection of tragic anecdotes and started to look like a systemic failure that demanded immediate, high-level action. At Anacostia, they convene an emergency panel, a brain trust of flight surgeons, aircraft designers, and hardened squadron leaders. It's not a polite briefing, it's a war room. The losses are piling up, and the question is blunt. Why are veteran pilots trained to perfection simply not pulling out? Their orders are clear. Dissect procedure, physiology, and machines, and find a fix before more men die. They turned investigator fast and clinical. Planes went up again, this time loaded with instruments. High-speed cameras bolted to cockpits, G-meters, altimeters, and tiny lenses aimed at faces and hands. Every dive was filmed, every pullout logged. Flights were replayed frame by frame in dark rooms. Footage slowed until the final seconds stretched into a dozen questions waiting to be answered. The footage confirms the horrifying truth. The problem isn't the planes, it's the pilots. In grainy, silent film, you watch ace after ace execute textbook dives, perfect attitude, steady hands, bombs away, then nothing. No radio calls, no mechanical alarms. The camera catches their hands frozen on the stick, their faces blank, the aircraft completing a clean, fatal arc into the ground. This is not equipment failure, it's a failing human body. The standard dive technique demands more from a pilot's physiology than it can give. Doctrine that rewards perfection is now killing the men who follow it. How do you change the rules without losing the accuracy that made dive bombing deadly effective? They'd finally stripped the mystery down to its bones. It wasn't the metal or the motors, it was something happening inside the cockpit, inside the pilot. Now the Navy faced a brutal, inevitable question. Can you rewrite the rules of a weapon that depends on razor-thin timing without turning it into a blunt instrument? Change too little and pilots keep dying. Change too much and you surrender the pinpoint accuracy that made dive bombing decisive. The answer had to thread a needle between human bodies and ballistics, doctrine and survival, pride and pragmatism, and do it fast before more seasoned hands went silent. The panel's flight surgeons finally put a name to the thing everyone had been whispering about. It wasn't mechanical, political, or moral. It was physics, G-forces, the invisible squeeze that turns blood to ballast and vision to tunnel. Instruments showed sound planes and steady hands. It was the human body that was failing. In the brutal seconds of a pullout, a perfectly trained pilot could be betrayed by his own circulation, vision graying, then narrowing, then gone not because he panicked, but because the laws of motion simply won. The numbers that followed were stark and chilling. Imagine being pinned to your seat by 7 times your weight, your body suddenly a slab of iron as the world rips past. When a pilot pulls out of a steep, high-speed dive, he isn't just steering, he's being slammed by 5 to 7 Gs, forces that make normal movement impossible and turn muscle and bone into ballast. Breathing becomes an effort. The heart races and then struggles. Vision narrows, hands go heavy, reaction time shrinks to seconds. Even the best-trained aviators, operating perfect aircraft and flawless technique, can find their bodies betraying them under that crushing load. At those crushing Gs, the body stops being a machine and becomes a trap. In an instant, the blood, suddenly heavy as lead, is yanked out of the brain and forced down into the chest and legs, leaving the skull starved for circulation. The eyes and the thinking centers, everything that tells you where you are, begin to lose their lifeblood first, so sight dulls, judgment blurs, and reflexes falter even while the hands stay locked on the stick. It's a brutal physiological betrayal that turns perfect technique into a silent, unstoppable disaster. As the blood roars away from the skull, the world peels itself like paint. First comes the gray colors draining until everything looks like an old newspaper. Then the edges go. The cockpit shudders inward and the horizon squeezes to a narrow tunnel. Sounds dull. Instruments swim. Your hands keep moving on autopilot while your eyes betray you, narrowing to a single pinprick of sight that ignores the flak and the screaming engine. Time stretches and compresses at once. Seconds feel like hours, but the truth is simple and brutal. Vision is retreating, and whatever comes next will do it fast. At about 5G. The outside world doesn't just dim, it vanishes. Color drains, peripheral vision collapses into a narrow tunnel, and then even that pinprick of sight goes. That's blackout, a terrifying state where the pilot is still awake, heart thundering, ears filled with engine roar and instrument clicks, but he cannot see a thing. He feels the stick in his hands, the controls under his fingers, yet his eyes return only absolute darkness. In the cockpit, it is like being sealed in a black box, while the airplane keeps obeying physics, and it's the last thing he remembers before the next, deadlier step. Just beyond that, at 6 Gs, 6 times the force you're used to, the brain is starved of oxygen until it simply quits. What begins as a gray wash of color gives way to tunnel vision, then total blackout. And at 6G, it doesn't just darken, it shuts down. This is G-force-induced loss of consciousness, or G-lock, a sudden physiological power outage where the neurons that keep your heart, your hands, your decisions coordinated lose the oxygen they need. It isn't a slow fade, it's an abrupt off switch. Worse, it can flip in the middle of a pullout, leaving a pilot awake no more and the airplane to finish the arc alone. The terrifying reality lands like a punch. The pullout takes longer than the pilot's brain can tolerate. He can do everything right, voice calm, hands steady, routine muscle memory executed to perfection, and still lose consciousness halfway through the recovery. 1 second he's flying, the next, his world goes dark and his grip goes slack. The plane doesn't know he's gone. It follows the arc he set, obedient and unforgiving until ground and metal meet. No alarms, no last-second radio call, just a silent cockpit and a machine that keeps on doing exactly what it was told. His hand freezes on the stick, his body goes limp. The world narrows to a point of roaring sound and cold metal. Instruments climb, the horizon rushes up. Every muscle that once guaranteed survival is suddenly useless because his blood has been yanked from his brain and the lights have gone out. He is still in the cockpit, still attached to the controls, but the pilot who knew exactly what to do has vanished. The plane, obedient to physics, completes the fatal arc. How do you fight an enemy that lives inside your own body? They knew. The Navy had seen the danger of acceleration long before the crashes, and they taught pilots a ritual, an anti-G straining maneuver that looked odd on paper but worked in the sky. Tense your legs, lock your core, squeeze your butt, and forcefully bite down and grunt while pumping your chest in short, disciplined breaths to keep blood up where it matters. It was drilled until it became reflex-counted repetitions, muscle memory, a cadence to beat the physics that wanted to pull you apart. It sounds crude, it sounds simple, but it was science wrapped in grit, a last line of defense against the invisible shove of gravity. But in the final seconds of a dive, with the target rushing up and the engine screaming, everything the pilot trained for shrinks down to a few brutal tasks. Check your panel, align your sight, call the release. Watch the ground climb. Their brains are jammed, every sense overloaded, every second a decision. Conscious thought becomes a luxury they can't afford. The anti-G routine: tense the legs, clamp the jaw, force the breath requires deliberate effort. But with flak bursting and fighters on your tail, that deliberate effort is the first thing to go. They don't forget the trigger, they forget to strain. The body betrays them. Ironically, half a world away, the very problem eating American pilots had already been seen and fixed. In Germany, before the war, Stuka crews were blacking out on pullouts, and German engineers answered not with pep talks, but with a clever machine, an automatic pullout device that took over when a pilot went limp, using simple pneumatics to finish the recovery. It was crude, elegant, brutally effective. The device cut training accidents dramatically and proved a lesson the U.S. would painfully learn: that technology can outsmart doctrine, and that solutions sometimes come from admitting you're not the first to face a problem. By 1939, the Luftwaffe was already fighting the same invisible enemy pilots. In Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers were simply blacking out and crashing during training. It wasn't a handful of flukes, it was a pattern that bled through units and kept commanding officers awake at night. Men who should have been masters of their machines were losing sight, then consciousness, in the exact instant they needed both most. The Germans didn't shrug and call it bad luck. They studied it, measured it, and quietly pushed engineers and flight surgeons together until a practical answer began to take shape, a machine that could save a pilot when his body failed. They didn't redesign the plane or rewrite the manual. German engineers built a quiet, mechanical guardian, an automatic pull-out system that did exactly one thing: take the controls at a preset altitude and haul the aircraft out of a dive if the pilot had already slipped unconscious. Pneumatic actuators, simple pressure trips, a fail-safe wired to the altimeter, nothing heroic, just reliable physics doing the work a human couldn't when blood was leaving the brain. In practice, it meant a pilot could initiate a perfect attack and still be saved if his body betrayed him, a modest, brilliant device that turned a mortal weakness into a survivable risk. The device worked. Stuka training accidents fell off a cliff, down by more than 80%, and the Luftwaffe suddenly had a simple, brutal answer to a problem that had been killing its pilots. But in 1942, when U.S. intelligence got its hands on a captured Stuka, they looked the other way. Engineers called it clever. Commanders called it unnecessary. The verdict was kinder: German over-engineering. In practice, it was arrogance. America dismissed a life-saving idea as a crutch, a mistake that would cost lives before anyone was willing to admit the truth. When U.S. intelligence peered into the captured Stuka, They didn't see a life-saving gadget, they saw weakness. The automatic pullout was sneered at as German over-engineering, a mechanical crutch for pilots who lacked courage or skill. It fit a dangerous myth that our training, our discipline, and sheer grit were superior to any foreign trick. So the device was filed away, dismissed by officers who trusted doctrine more than data. That cultural arrogance wasn't harmless pride, it was a delay. 8 more months of avoidable deaths would follow before anyone admitted the problem wasn't a lack of skill, but a blind spot in their assumptions. Just as the brass were about to throw up their hands, the answer arrived from the margins, an unlikely, almost anonymous pilot nobody had put on a pedestal. Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Riley. He wasn't a star in the training logs, not a polished demo pilot, just a stubborn kid who flew his own way and kept coming back with results that didn't fit the narrative. Where others followed doctrine like scripture, Riley nudged the envelope, trusted numbers over habit, and quietly accumulated data the investigators hadn't even thought to look for. In a room full of experts, the breakthrough came from someone everyone had assumed they'd already taught everything to. Riley's scores didn't just look good, they looked impossible. Bombing runs with pin-sharp grouping, hits where bombing theory said there should be misses, reports that read like miracles. The squadron stared at the sheets in disbelief. Men who'd seen everything in combat leaned back and swore something was wrong. It didn't take long for skepticism to harden into accusation. His superiors formally charged him with fabricating results, filing paperwork, demanding explanations. For a junior-grade aviator to be branded a liar by veterans was a social and professional slap, and it turned Riley from an outlier into the center of a very public investigation. Riley drops a bombshell. He says he's releasing his bombs at altitudes far lower than regulations allow, deliberately flirting with what every manual and instructor calls suicidal. To his superiors, it looks like bravado or fraud. To the squadron, it looks like a death wish. He insists it's technique, not luck, that gets his results, that he can survive the pullout other pilots can't. The claim feels obscene, an engineered violation of everything they'd been taught, but it forces a harder question. What if the rule meant to keep pilots safe is the thing actually killing them? But Riley has proof: grainy gun camera frames that tell a story no testimony could. Crosshairs, altimeter digits tumbling, the release, and then the bomb striking dead center time after time. The footage is irrefutable. While other pilots pray their guts and training will carry them through the pullout, Riley's runs land within a circular error probable of just 35 feet surgical precision that turns doctrine on its head. It's one thing to claim bravery, it's another to point a camera at the sky and force the numbers to speak. The room grows quiet. This changes everything. The panel is stunned. Riley isn't just good, he's surgically precise. Records that were dismissed as flukes are suddenly proof. Men who accused him of padding the log stare at the grainy gun camera footage and can't find a single error. Release timing, trajectory, even the way his plane shimmies before recovery. All textbook, all repeatable. And the strangest part, he comes back from those dives alive every time. For a room used to blaming equipment or pilot error, this is worse. It's a direct challenge to doctrine. Faces harden. Notes are taken. Someone finally says the line no one dared before: run the numbers. They put Riley's footage, wind tunnel data, and bombing tables on a single long table and let the math speak, and what it said was both elegant and brutal. His low-altitude release wasn't a lucky fluke. It changed the geometry of the whole maneuver, stretching the recovery arc so the pullout could be gentler, cutting the peak Gs that had been snapping pilots unconscious. The bombs still hit where the sights predicted because the shorter fall reduced drift, making the drop more predictable, not less. In one clean stroke, doctrine was exposed as a dangerous myth. Skill alone couldn't beat physiology, and the Navy was forced to rethink everything. On paper, the numbers had always added up. The bomb sight math for a low-altitude release was clean, precise, almost elegant. But doctrine had already decided the worst. No pilot could survive the pullout that followed, so the idea was never field-tested. Manuals, training schedules, and bitter classroom debates froze the theory into a taboo. Practical bravery and hard-earned muscle memory beat cold computation. Better to cling to the high release and hope for the best than to challenge the rulebook. That untested equation hung like a dare in the margins of every flight manual, a quiet, dangerous hypothesis waiting for someone willing to prove it true. Riley had found the secret, and it was maddeningly simple. Instead of obeying the sacred 2,500-foot rule and yanking the stick like a man trying to stop a fall, he rode the dive a little farther and let the bomb go lower. By doing so, he didn't need a brutal, instant pullout. He could recover over a longer, gentler arc. That small change turned peak G into a manageable slope, buying the pilot's body precious seconds and preserving sight and consciousness when it mattered most. It was a counterintuitive fix. More risk on paper, but in practice both safer and far more accurate. What Riley had stumbled onto wasn't some mystical trick, it was time. By letting the dive run a little longer and releasing lower, the recovery arc stretched out. The violent, instant yank that used to spike G's was traded for a gentler, drawn-out curve. Peak G forces fell. The load that once slammed blood out of a pilot's head was now shared across several seconds, giving the cardiovascular system a fighting chance instead of an instant knockout. In plain terms, the pilot could breathe, see, and keep control long enough to finish the pullout, accuracy preserved, blackout avoided, survival suddenly possible. It gave his cardiovascular system a crucial chance to adapt. Instead of yanking the stick and subjecting his body to a sudden, crushing spike, Riley let the forces build and ebb like a wave, slower, predictable, manageable. Blood stayed where the brain needed it. Vision stayed. Consciousness stayed. He wasn't fighting the G's with grit and clenched teeth. He was managing them with timing, geometry, and a cold, calculated patience. That small change, less panic, more precision, turned a fatal instinct into a teachable tactic, something pilots could practice until it became muscle memory under fire. Suddenly, everything made sense. What had looked like bravado or sloppy judgment wasn't a fluke at all, but a hidden answer. By stretching the recovery arc, Riley didn't need a violent, brain-crushing yank. He smoothed it out, lowering the peak G and giving the body time to adjust. That one tweak turned a suicidal flourish into a manageable procedure. The same precision everyone worshipped now came wrapped in safety. For the first time, the math, the medicine, and the footage lined up, and the room shifted from disbelief to a single, urgent question. How fast can we teach every pilot to do the same? At Langley, the theorists didn't leave it to gut feeling. They ran the numbers, replayed the cockpit films, and stripped the problem down to equations and altimeter ticks. The result was brutal in its simplicity. The sacred 2,500-foot release wasn't a law of physics. It was a rule of thumb, a legacy number plucked from comfort, not physiology. In other words, doctrine was dictating danger. That arbitrary line forced pilots into abrupt, high-G pullouts that their bodies couldn't sustain. Engineers could now show, on paper and in practice, that a different release profile would tame the G's and let men live to pull out. On paper, 2,500 feet looked like common sense, a tidy margin between a falling bomb and the pilots trying to live through the recovery. It was chosen for a perceived sense of safety, distance, buffer, a rule engineers and tacticians could point to. What nobody had measured was the human body in the loop. The rule assumed metal and math, not blood and brains. It ignored how quickly blood drains from the skull under a violent pullout, how vision collapses and consciousness can slip away. The altitude was arbitrary protective on charts, blind to the pilot's physiological limits. The 2,500-foot rule didn't just miss the mark, it created the trap. Meant as a safety buffer, it forced pilots into an abrupt, violent recovery. Full throttle, full back on the stick, and a compressed pullout that skyrocketed G's in a heartbeat. Instead of giving a margin for error, the regulation demanded a sudden, high G correction to avoid the ground, turning a recoverable maneuver into a physiological death zone where even veteran pilots could black out mid-pull. Once you realize the rule itself was the enemy, the logic of a gentler, lower release starts to snap into place. Then Riley did something nobody taught him to do. He held the dive longer and released around 1,800 feet. That small change turned everything. With a lower release, the recovery could be drawn out less abrupt, lower peak G's, so the pilot's body had time to cope. The bomb spent less time fighting crosswinds too, so its path was straighter and far more predictable. It wasn't luck or bravado, it was a practical fix born of physics. Riley hadn't broken the rules so much as uncovered a hidden law of aviation. The discovery solved the mystery on paper, but it also meant the Navy had to teach a whole generation to fly differently. They had the answer scientific, elegant, and painfully simple, but the victory felt half-made. Now the Navy faced something far harder than a design problem: retraining an entire corps of hardened dive bomber pilots mid-war. Thousands of men, deep habits, doctrines carved into muscle and pride. You cannot just hand out a memo and expect reflexes to change. Instructors, flight surgeons, and engineers would have to rewrite training, build new simulators, and force pilots to trust instruments over instinct while bullets and carriers still burned in the Pacific. It was a race against habit and against time, because every day of delay meant more lives at risk. It wasn't just a technical fix, it was a psychological one. The Navy had to convince seasoned pilots to literally unlearn reflexes that had kept them alive for years. Hands that automatically yanked the stick up, eyes that searched the horizon for safety, a gut screaming, "Pull up now." That kind of muscle memory runs deep, hardened by stress, noise, and battle. Breaking it meant creating doubt in instincts and building new habits under pressure. Teaching a pilot to trust an altimeter over a heartbeat, to let a plane fall a little longer so he could live to fly another mission. It was harder than any combat maneuver. At NAS Jacksonville, they ripped up the checklist and built a school to match the crisis, part flight academy, part human laboratory. Classrooms were lined with altimeters and anatomy charts. Hangars echoed with simulators and the low hum of test rigs. Instructors walked pilots through the invisible physics of a pullout, how blood behaves under 5, 6, 7 Gs, why muscle memory can betray you, and how a slow, methodical recovery arc can be the difference between a mission and a grave. It wasn't bravado training. It was education with a purpose to turn hair-trigger instinct into calculated, repeatable technique, and the pilots showed up hungry to learn. In stuffy briefing rooms at NAS Jacksonville, the new curriculum looks nothing like the macho pep talks pilots expect. It's a clinic. They sit through diagrams of the heart and brain, watch slow-motion footage of blood sloshing under G, and trace the path that oxygen takes and loses when the body is squeezed. Flight surgeons teach the warning signs: gray out, tunnel vision, that awful blankness before a blackout. This is training to rewire reflexes, replace the reflex to yank the stick with a practiced, conscious sequence. Instinct becomes procedure. Fearful gut reactions are traded for checklists, numbers, and a science pilots can actually follow in the last terrible seconds. They learn that G-forces aren't a test of courage to be fought, but a predictable physical event to be managed. No longer a dare to prove masculinity, G's become a set of variables, duration, rate, peak, that can be measured, anticipated, and mitigated. Medical lectures turn into practical drills, timing breaths, tensing key muscle groups, reading the altimeter, and rehearsing the moment when senses will lie. Relief ripples through the pilots. Admitting vulnerability becomes professional. Confidence shifts from gut steel to procedure. It's not weakness to trust an instrument, it's survival. And with that simple reframe, the stage is set to replace instinct with a repeatable, life-saving routine. In simulators, they relearn to trust altimeters over their senses. Screens rattle with artificial G, and pilots shout their heights: 2,400, 2,000, 200, 2,000, forcing the conscious mind to stay alert when the body wants to fade. Instructors set the rhythm. Every call-out becomes a lifeline against tunnel vision, drilling reflexes to obey gauges, not instinct, before they take it back into the air. Now they take it up for real. In the air, instructors fly wing to wing, voices clipped over the roar. 2,200. Altimeters are worshipped. Every tick is gospel. 2,000, the instructor calls. Hands tense, breath held. The student follows the dial, not the panic. 1,800 pull, comes the steady command, and instinct is converted into precise timing. They are rewiring their brains literally, retraining reflexes that used to save lives but now kill. In classrooms, they learn blood and gravity. In simulators, they practice the drill until the cadence is muscle deep. Call the altitude. Tense. Breathe. Trust the needle. In the air, instructors ride wing to wing, voices clipped. 2200, 2000, 1800, until the pilot's panic is drowned out by protocol. What used to be a frantic last-second fight becomes a calm, measured choreography, hands moving because the body has learned to move. Eyes following instruments instead of fear, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the maneuver turns from certain death into repeatable science. By August 1943, the change was undeniable. The new graduates were not just surviving those fearsome dives, they were rewriting what dive bombing could do. Bombs that once scattered now clustered, targets that once required multiple passes were ruined on a single run. Instructors who had watched colleagues vanish now watched students come back smiling, altimeters and training overriding panic. Word spread through the ready rooms and up the chain of command that a stubborn, counterintuitive tactic had become a reproducible skill. Confidence replaced superstition. Doctrine began to lean toward the new method, and the Navy quietly prepared the pilots who would face the real test months later. The ultimate test arrives in June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. What history would call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It's the kind of moment you train for and still can't fully imagine. Thousands of aircraft turning the sky into a furnace, carriers steaming like islands of steel, radio crackle and tracers stitching the horizon. For the men who rewired their instincts at Jacksonville, this is do-or-die proof. Their new delayed pullout technique will be measured not in drills, but in lives and metal. If it works, it won't just save pilots, it will change naval air warfare forever. A massive Japanese carrier strike force descends dozens of gray birds blotting the horizon. On the American side, alarms scream. Newly trained dive bomber squadrons thumb the throttles and climb into the boiling sky, men who've relearned how to flirt with death now rising with instruments and new doctrine in hand. Radios crackle, wings form up. Every second now decides who lives. Lieutenant Commander James Ramage boots his engines and pulls Bombing Squadron 10 into formation like a knife-tight, hungry, disciplined. These aren't scared boys, they're trained, tempered, and now armed with a new kind of faith, the delayed pullout. Altimeters over instincts. Smooth, longer recoveries instead of the old, violent wrench that used to blank out the best of them. Ramage's hand is steady on the throttle. His pilots breathe with the plane, counting down in their heads, trusting math over panic. They carry the lesson of loss into combat, and this time, they're the ones who know how to survive it. They plunge from altitude, throttles wide, guts clenched. Flak blossoms around them, orange flowers that shred the sky. Zero fighters scream up to meet them, black silhouettes darting through tracer. Wingmen hold formation, eyes on altimeters, hands steady. Bombs hang like grim promises. Every second counts. They trust the new math and drive down into the storm. The results were apocalyptic. In a single breathless pass, Ramage's squadron ripped through the Japanese formation, smoke, twisted metal, pilots gone so fast the sky looked wrong. Post-action analysis credited them with destroying or damaging 23 enemy aircraft in that one run, a level of accuracy that left commanders speechless and analysts rewriting their assumptions. It wasn't luck, it was method. Delayed pullouts, steadier arcs, pilots who had learned to trust instruments over instinct. Ships and fighters that had seemed safe a moment before were suddenly crippled or gone. That terrifying efficiency didn't just win a fight, it signaled a new era in naval air warfare. Later in the battle, facing the Japanese carrier Hio, the new hold and pull late technique got its moment of truth. Pilots dove deeper, released lower, and traded a brutal, sudden pullout for a longer, gentler recovery. They punched through flak and fighters and came out with bombs that hit with surgical precision, 2 strikes in the same elevator shaft, crippling the ship before torpedo planes finished the job. The maneuver hadn't just saved lives, it turned dive bombers into pinpoint weapons against warships. Then, in a single terrifying sweep, the new technique paid off in steel and flame. Dive bombers sliced through anti-aircraft bursts and zeros, pierced the deck, and 2 bombs almost impossibly struck the same elevator shaft, detonating in sequence and blowing the ship's spine out from under her. Decks kinked, fires raced up the superstructure, power failed, and the crew's fight for damage control collapsed into chaos. The Hio went from a fighting carrier to a crippled hulk in minutes, motionless and vulnerable, exactly the opening the torpedo bombers needed to move in and finish the job. It was more than a tactical tweak. It was a revolution in how the Navy fought the sky. Squadrons that had been losing their best men in quiet training crashes now returned from strikes with crews intact, and targets shattered. Pilots who had once been taught to fight their bodies learned instead to work with them. Accuracy soared, losses plummeted, and a doctrine written on the fly became the new standard across carriers and air stations. What looked at first like a dangerous experiment proved to be a lifeline. The delayed pullout turned dive bombers from risky area weapons into precision tools of war. The gamble paid off. Numbers rarely lie. The statistics tell the final story. Once the delayed pullout was rolled out across the fleet, blackout incidents plunged by 91% and training accidents fell to almost zero. Squadrons that had been stripped thin by mystery and fear began returning whole. Instructors stopped bracing for the worst. The shift was surgical. It saved lives, kept planes airborne, and rebuilt a battered confidence in the cockpit. What started as a stubborn, counterintuitive tweak became doctrine, turning dive bombing from a desperate gamble into a precise, reliable weapon, and proving that the smartest change sometimes comes from listening to science, not pride. In combat, the numbers did more than impress. They rewrote strategy. Hit rates against maneuvering warships jumped to an astonishing 32%. What had been an area weapon, a scattershot hope dropped from the sky, had become a surgical instrument, able to punch a ship's vitals with uncanny precision. Ships that once shrugged off raids began to list and burn from single, perfectly placed hits. The change was practical and profound. Fewer lost pilots, more decisive strikes, and an entire doctrine reshaped by data and discipline. It proved something quiet but huge, that questioning a rule and trusting science could turn vulnerability into advantage. Their salvation came not from better engines or braver men, but from a stubborn willingness to question everything they'd been taught. When surgeons, engineers, and one contrarian pilot refused to accept the obvious, they rewrote a doctrine that had quietly been killing the best aviators. They traded reflex for reason, instinct for instruments, and in doing so, turned a blunt area weapon into a surgical tool. Blackout incidents plummeted, training deaths nearly vanished, and hit rates climbed to unheard-of levels. It's a bitter, hopeful lesson. The greatest danger often hides inside our assumptions, and sometimes survival means holding the dive and pulling out late.